Every screen on the Coalition flagship went dark at once. I watched it from the Vigil's observation deck. Behind me, the board blinked off the fleet's 40,000 transponder signals in 11 seconds. The only light still burning belonged to the ship I was standing on, the human dreadnought Vigil, reactor cold for 60 years, and somehow the one vessel in this armada that the enemy's kill code had missed. What did an obsolete human warship know that a modern fleet didn't? Let me tell you about the Vigil, and about what it cost to keep her. I was her engineer, not her captain, her engineer, and then her caretaker, and through all 60 of those years, her constant. When the Coalition decommissioned her, they drew up the paperwork in triplicate and patted me on the shoulder like I'd lost a pet. She served with honor, Elias. Time to let her rest. I signed nothing. I stayed. 9 of us stayed in the end. Retired crew who came back to polish a hull nobody would ever launch again. We swept her decks. We oiled her hardlines. We spun her reaction wheels by hand so they wouldn't seize. The dockyard called us sentimental. The Admiralty called us a line item. I called her home. 60 years, and the Vigil sat cold and patient while the galaxy built sleeker, smarter, louder ships. Ships that ran on integrated networks, one nervous system per vessel, every gun and every thruster answering to a single overworked mind. The Zoranni called that progress. The Coalition agreed. We never agreed. We just didn't fight about it. We kept the Vigil the way she was built, the way we build everything back on Earth. You have to understand something about us. Every human structure is built twice. There is the system, and there is the system that replaces the system when the first one dies. We do it for water. We do it for power. We do it for the machines we trust with our lives, because we learned a long time ago that anything can break, and the only way to survive that is to plan for it. Think about the way we fly. A passenger aircraft crosses an ocean with 2 engines, 2 pilots, 2 flight computers, and 2 of almost everything else, because 100 years ago, we discovered that the difference between a near miss and a funeral is often just a second set of everything. Think about the way we speak. The word radio comes from a century of ships carrying backup transmitters, and the word backup itself. Every office on Earth keeps copies of its records in another building, another city, another country, on paper and in stone and in orbit, because we have watched whole libraries burn and decided we would not let that happen again. The galaxy looked at that and called it inefficient. We called it Tuesday. The Vigil was the loudest argument we ever made about that. She had no integrated network. She had hardlines, mechanical relays, and a reactor you could only start by hand. Her guns had no digital targeting, a trained eye, and a manual lead, like a marksman who never needed a scope. When they built her, someone asked our engineers why they were bolting in analog backups for systems that would never fail. Because they will fail, they said, and will still be flying. I used to tell the junior caretakers that story on slow nights, leaning against the cold reactor housing with a thermos of something that was mostly coffee. Ollie Dean would laugh and say the Zoranni would eat us alive. Ollie was my watch supervisor back when we had a watch to supervise. He stayed like me, 58, built like a dock crane, and the only other human who remembered which valve was which without looking. 60 years, he said to me on the morning it all started. 60 years, Elias, and they finally sent us an escort. The Admiral himself. I looked up from the main bus. I was rewiring. Which Admiral? Fleet Admiral Dorth. The Sothrai. The one who calls us a museum. I wiped my hands. Then we should dress for the occasion. The Vigil wasn't in the escort fleet. We were a ceremonial berth, a footnote at the edge of staging ground the size of a small moon. The Coalition was assembling the largest force in a generation to throw back the Zoranni incursion, and our little decommissioned hulk had been anchored a safe distance from the real warships, like a portrait of a war we'd already lost. That was deliberate. Admiral Mael Dorth had ordered it himself. I watched the fleet form up on the Vigil's observation deck, my hands behind my back, Ollie beside me. The screens showed the Coalition's newest cruisers sliding into formation, every surface bristling with weapon systems I didn't recognize and probably couldn't repair. They looked magnificent. They looked like the future. They looked like they had never once thought about what happens when the lights go out. Dorth's flagship, the Errata, a ship the size of a city, hung at the center of it all. On her bridge, I knew the Admiral was running his final pre-battle review, reading readiness reports off a network so fast it made my head hurt. The network. Everything ran on the network. That was the Zoranni's opening. I saw it happen. I will never unsee it. The enemy didn't fire a single shot at the fleet. They fired a single signal. A broadcast, unencrypted, almost courteous, like a doorbell. It wasn't aimed at us, of course. We weren't on the network. We'd never been on the network. We were the only ship in the staging ground that the signal simply washed over the way a wave washes over a rock that's been there since before the tide had a name. The Coalition fleet went dark in 11 seconds. 40,000 transponder signals snuffed out at once. I watched the board blink them off, one after another, in a cascade that took less time than it takes to say goodbye. The great ships hung dead in their formation, their crews suddenly blind and deaf and helpless inside their own machines, their nervous systems severed by a single word. The enemy had found a one weakness that every modern vessel shared. Every vessel except one. Ollie was the first to speak. His voice was very quiet. Elias. The board. I see it. The Vigil is still lit. I see it. We stood there in the silence, two old men in a museum, and the whole galaxy suddenly held its breath around us. On the screens, the Zoranni broadcast replaced the fleet status. An Imperator's face, Withdrawal, I'd learn the name later, smiled out of every console, his voice smooth and gloating. The Coalition fleet is neutralized. Your commanders cannot speak. Your guns cannot fire. In 1 hour, our boarding parties will claim every vessel and the relay station and the gate beyond it. There is no resistance. He paused, savoring it. I am told there is no resistance. Ollie looked at me. I looked at the main bus I'd been rewiring for the last hour. Every critical system on the Vigil built twice. I walked to the engineer's chair and sat down for the first time in 60 years. If you've ever been counted out, I said to no one in particular because the dead fleet around us had gone very quiet, and then turned out to be the only one who was still on their feet. Tell me what you kept running. I'll read the comments. Ollie stared at me. You're going to answer him? I'm going to start the reactor. Elias, it's been 60 years. I know. I kept it oiled. The enemy's victory broadcast was still playing when I hit the ignition sequence. For the first time in 6 decades, the Vigil's cold steel body began to warm. The lights came up one at a time, deck by deck, like a woman stretching after a long sleep. The hard lines clicked and settled. The reaction wheels spun up, and the deck beneath us began, faintly, to hum. And then I opened the comms, and I spoke into the face of the Imperator of the Zoranni. Ship 40,001, I said. Still here. The smile on Withdrawal's face flickered. It was the most satisfying thing I'd seen in 60 years. It took the Coalition fleet 3 minutes to understand what had just happened, and another 2 to get a message to us. The comm crackled, and a voice I recognized came through. Strained, disbelieving, the voice of a man who had just watched his entire command die in front of him and then been asked to accept a miracle. This is Fleet Admiral Dorth. A pause. Unidentified vessel. Identify yourself. Not unidentified. Admiral. The Vigil. Caretaker Grant. Another pause. Longer this time. I could picture his throat sac pulsing, bright with a confusion he would never have shown a subordinate. The Vigil, he repeated, like the word was a foreign language. The museum ship. The same, I said. We were never on your network. That's why we're still breathing. You have weapons? Some. I checked the board. The old kind. Railguns. No targeting to jam. Dorth was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had lost some of its command. Caretaker Grant. My fleet is dead. I have no guns, no drives, no eyes. I have one ship that a maintenance crew refused to let die. That's right, I said. Tell me, he said slowly, why your people build a warship that could survive this? I leaned back in the engineer's chair. The Vigil's reactor hummed beneath my hands like a heartbeat. Because we never bet everything on one system, I said. And if you would like more of these, the galaxy's mightiest machinery meeting the one species that keeps a backup for everything, hit subscribe. We keep the lights on for the ones they wrote off. and the enemy saw the impossible thing happen. Withdrawal's boarding parties moved in on the dead fleet, and the museum ship undocked from her ceremonial berth and drifted into the center of the battlefield. No escort, no formation, just one Old Dreadnought, guns cold, lights burning, presenting herself to the entire Zoranni armada like a challenge. The Imperator laughed on the open channel. "What is this? A ceremonial ship? A retirement home with guns?" He turned to someone off-screen. "Send a skirmisher. Scratch it, and let's be done." The skirmisher came in fast, firing as it closed. Modern plasma, aimed by a targeting system that had never once thought about a target this slow. The Vigil's point defense, manual, antique, and still brutally effective, cut the first volley out of the sky. The second volley, she took on the armor. She was built for that. Built to take hits a modern ship would have ended to, because we never built anything that couldn't survive its own failure. The skirmisher broke off, smoking. Withdrawal stopped laughing. "Curious," he said, and I heard the first crack in his confidence. "A lucky vessel. Send 3. 3 came. 3 were stopped." The Vigil's railguns spoke for the first time in 60 years. Throwing tungsten at velocities the enemy's screens had never been calibrated to track, because the enemy had spent a century designing countermeasures for guided weapons and had never once planned for a projectile that was simply thrown very, very hard. The fourth time Withdrawal spoke, his voice had gone cold. "Boarding parties. Take that ship. I want to know how it is still alive." The boarding attempt was the part one almost didn't survive. They came in hard, breaching pods, slamming into the Vigil's flank, cutting through the outer hull with tools designed for modern composite. They hit the armor belt and found layer after layer after layer, 60 years of redundancy in rivets and plates and seals, and by the time they carved through, the ship's compartments had already sealed themselves, the emergency lighting had already come up, and the interior had become a maze of choke points designed by people who assumed, correctly, that one day it would be boarded. Ollie was waiting for them in the second corridor with a tool he had no business carrying. He held that corridor alone for 90 seconds, and in those 90 seconds the reactor's safety interlocks finished cycling, and the Vigil's internal defenses woke up. I told him afterwards he was an idiot. He told me I'd made him wait most of his life for a fight, and he'd been saving it. The Zoranni boarding parties were dead or withdrew. Withdrawal's ship, his flagship, the one he'd been so confident in, had moved to the edge of the battlefield, and I watched his bridge crew scramble on the tactical screen, try to make sense of a vessel that didn't exist in any doctrine. "Impossible," he said, and the word was no longer gloating. "It has no network. It has no network, and it functions." "Exactly," I said. "We built it before the network. We built it to function when the network dies. And you, Imperator, have just learned what every human child learns in the first year of school, which is anything can break." I opened the last hard line, and the Vigil's main railgun charged. So we planned for it. The enemy fleet had a choice to make. Their kill code was spent. Their boarding parties had failed. Their weapons couldn't track a ship that didn't run on their rules, and their glorious leader had just watched a 60-year-old museum piece outfight his entire doctrine. They withdrew, not in panic. They were still an army, and they left in good order, but they withdrew. The gate stayed in coalition hands. The relay station stayed dark, but ours. And the dead fleet began, very slowly, to come back to life, rebooted by a single human ship broadcasting an unencrypted safety instruction on a channel so old it predated their grandmother's hardware. "Restart your network," I told them, to the entire coalition armada. "Reconnect one system at a time. And next time, gentlemen, build a backup." The words traveled further than I expected. 3 days later, Fleet Admiral Mael Dorth came to the Vigil in person. Not to the dock, aboard. He walked her decks slowly, running a clawed hand along the hard lines, stopping at the point defense stations where the crew had scrawled their names 60 years ago. He stopped at the reactor housing, where I'd spent so many nights with my thermos. "You know," he said, "I ordered this ship home. I called her a liability. I wrote a memorandum. I know, Admiral. I was wrong." His throat sac pulsed bright and slow, and I understood that for his species, this was the closest thing to kneeling. "You saved my fleet. You saved the gate. You saved everything the Coalition spent a century building because you built something that would not stop working when everything else did. I didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say. Tell me the truth, Caretaker Grant, he said. Did you know? When you sat in this chair, did you know this would happen? No, I said. I knew it could. That's the whole point. You can't know what will break. You can only know that something will. We stood together in the humming quiet of a ship that was never supposed to fly again. One system, Dorth said softly, repeating my words back to me like a prayer. You never bet everything on one system. No, I said. We never do. The Coalition rewrote its doctrine that season. Every new ship was built with hard lines, mechanical relays, manual backups for every critical system. They called it the Vigil Clause, and I heard my own words read back to me in a dozen languages, in council chambers and engineering halls, by admirals and engineers and children who would never know my name. The Zoranni never came back through that gate. The story goes that their own engineers spent years trying to understand how a ship without a network could fight, and that the thing that finally convinced them to abandon the assault was not our guns. It was the maintenance logs. 60 years of oiling, sweeping, polishing, and checking. 60 years of 9 old humans refusing to let a ship die. Not because it was valuable, not because it was useful, but because it was theirs. The enemy read those logs, and somewhere in the middle of them, the Zoranni strategist looked up and understood that humanity could not be defeated. Not because our weapons were better, because we do not let the things we love fail. I went back to the Vigil's deck the next morning, as I had every morning for 60 years. She'd been recommissioned as a training ship, which I considered a fine ending. Ollie was already there, polishing the point defense housing, whistling a tune I didn't recognize. Admiral says they're giving us a full crew, he said. Real sailors. Actual young people. Good, I said. Somebody has to teach them how to build a backup. Elias. He stopped polishing. When the power went out everywhere else, the whole fleet, the whole galaxy, did you ever think we wouldn't make it? I looked at the reactor housing, warm now, humming, alive in a way it hadn't been in 60 years. I thought about the 9 of us and the 60 years, and the thermos of mostly coffee, and the valve Ollie had taught me to find by touch. No, I said, we build things to survive after they break. That's the whole trick. Ollie grinned at me, and I knew he understood. If you've ever had something everyone told you was too old to matter, and you kept it running anyway, you already know how this story ends. We never bet everything on one system. We build a spare. We oil the spare. We stay. And when every other light in the galaxy goes out, the spare is still humming. Subscribe, ring the bell, and stay with the ones who keep the backup running.